to doing a musket presentation for you guys and telling you some more history. So my name's Mike. I'm one of the historic interpreters here at Fort York, which is very fortunate. Otherwise, we'd dress like a weirdo and waving a gun around and talking at you for no reason. But what I'm going to do is talk to you for the next 15 to 20 minutes or so about this item here, which is the musket, which was the primary offensive tool for an infantry soldier in the War of 1812. Now, is anybody here wearing an item of handmade clothing by any chance? Anybody at all? No, not a one, not a single person. Okay, so there's a reason for this, and that's that we live in a really heavily industrialized society, right? Like everything that you wear, probably even if it was handmade, the stuff that it was made from was probably manufactured in some way, right? And we're talking about an item that comes from before the Industrial Revolution. So this is a very brutal and simple piece of technology that was used for a very long time by the British Army. And it wasn't just used by the British Army. So this is introduced in Canada, so in the 13 colonies in Upper and Lower Canada, and the Maritimes and all that, as the item to be used for warfare and for trade, and it has an immediate impact on the continent as a whole, because now you've got indigenous population who a major technology is introduced to them. It's going to change the way they do trade, and it's going to be involved in every major warfare event that they have in North America, including the War of 1812. So it's a very important piece of technology, but very, very simple. So when I say this is simple, what I mean is that it is literally using like a rock to make it work, all right? So has anybody here ever used a Bunsen burner in science class? Yeah? Hands up, anybody? Okay, so sir, when you get it lit, what's the little device that you use? It's like a little thing that scrapes, you know what I'm talking about? You know the things I'm talking about? No? Okay, so it's a little starter where it's going to rub a stone against a rough piece of metal to create a spark, right? So anybody know what that stone is called? Yeah, it's a flint, right? So this is a flint lock musket, okay? So this area here where most of the firing mechanism occurs, there is literally a rock, a flint, that is screwed into place that's going to be used to make this go, all right? So what happens is I'm going to end up needing to load this item, so I'm going to walk you through that process. But basically what would happen is I'm going to take out a round or a charge from my cartridge box here, so this little fireproof box I got, and what it's going to be is a little piece of paper, and it's going to have a load of gunpowder inside of it with a musket ball. Musket ball is fairly big. It's going to be about the size of a marble, so 69 caliber for a, sir, if I could ask you please to stay on that side of the path during the demonstration, for a 70 caliber barrel. So really big barrel, really big ball, right? So what's going to happen is I'm going to take that piece of gunpowder, and I'm going to bite the top of the paper off, and I'm going to flip open what we call the frizzen. And I'm going to pour a little bit of gunpowder into this area that's known as the pan. So if you look inside the pan, this little bowl, you're going to see a little hole in there, all right? That is what is known as the touch hole or the vent hole. Okay, really, really small. Now, so as I mentioned before, I've got a large marble-sized ball, so I'm going to pour a little bit of gunpowder in there, and I'm going to close it. Now, unlike a modern weapon, I can't load it at the breech, and I've got a magazine, so it means I have to load it at the muzzle. All right, that hole down here, that touch hole, is really, really small. That musket ball is really, really big. So I'm going to pour the rest of the gunpowder, then the musket ball, and then that paper as well down into the barrel, all right, or down into the muzzle. We call this a muzzle-loading musket. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out this item. Does anybody know what this is called? Ramrod, 100% correct. All right, so have you ever heard that phrase, to ramrod something through? It means like to push it through. Basically what's happening here is I'm going to push it down, and I'm going to pack all that stuff down on the bottom to get it as close to the touch hole as possible. And I'm going to pull this out, and I'm going to return the ramrod to its place and then bring it up to the shoulder. Now going through that whole process, how many rounds have I loaded into this musket? 1, that's correct, right? It's a really, really slow, cumbersome weapon. Now I'm going to demonstrate firing this, and hopefully it's going to go off. I have not fired this musket before. This is a new one for me, so fingers crossed it's going to work. But I'm going to walk you through this again as I demonstrate. So try to imagine if I was practicing this in drill, or if I was doing this in the battlefield, I wouldn't just be one guy. There would be a whole line of soldiers next to me, and probably a whole other line of soldiers behind them. So I get the order to prime and load. I bring it down into a workspace, flip it open, and start going through that process. So I pull out my charge, light off the paper, pour some into the pan, and close it. I'm going to cast about, so I'm bringing about to the side. I'm going to pour the remainder down into the barrel. Now for this purpose of this demonstration, I'm not going to put the paper into the barrel, but I will draw the ramrod, throw it down, pack all that stuff down, and then return it. Back up to the shoulder, and I'm going to get the order to make ready, so I bring it up, cock it all the way, present, and fire. And it didn't go up. Alright, we'll try this again. I'm going to reprime. This is good, because in a second it'll give me a chance to talk about why this happens. There we go. All right. So, as predicted, it didn't go off in the first try, right? These things are notoriously unreliable. So despite the fact they're used for a really long period of time, because they are very reliable, it is going to go off most of the time. It's also not going to go off a lot of the time. By which I mean about, say, one every 8, one every 6, something like that, is probably going to be a misfire. How does this happen? Well, it happens for a number of reasons. Reason number one has to do with the flint. So every time that comes forward and rubs against this part here, the frizz, in order to create a spark that's going to go into the pan, that means that some of that flint is going to break off, right? So it's going to become more and more dull every time I fire it. Another issue too is the weapon itself is made of steel. What's the problem there? Well, you'll notice I didn't say stainless steel, okay? So stainless steel isn't going to rust when it gets wet. These things rust like crazy. So the second I put a whole bunch of shine and polish on this thing, it's going to start tarnishing, and the powder especially as well is going to make it tarnish even more. The powder also has a number of issues that it's going to do. One of them is going to foul up this area, so the touch hole can get clogged with the residue that comes from the black powder, which is why I have these items on me where there's a whisk and pick. It's so that I can actually brush out what's inside that pan and get that touch hole open more. The other thing too is that the powder itself is very, very absorbent, right? So it's made of a salty material. It's got sulfur and saltpeter in it, but also has charcoal, which is very, very, very absorbent, right? So it means it wants to suck the water right out of the atmosphere. So even on a humid day, all right, so if it had just rained and it got really hot, it could be that none of that black powder is going to go off. It's going to take the moisture right out of the atmosphere, right? Now, how long did it take me to load that? Anybody?
About a minute.
About a minute? That's a lie. I was faster than that. All right. So I should be able to get it done in around 15 seconds. I should be able to do like 4 shots a minute, which is actually like a lot of sustained activity. And to give you an idea, if I was a modern soldier and I'm firing a modern assault rifle, the amount of time it would take to empty a magazine, which is about 30 rounds, is going to be like a minute. Because you're going to sit there and go, and it's done. Not even a minute. For me to expend the same amount of ammunition in a musket, that's going to take me about 12 to 14 minutes, assuming I was doing it consistently at a really high speed and didn't have any misfires. All right? So I'm going to try and do it again at a faster speed. All right? You guys can time me. No gambling. That would be unethical. All right?
I got your time.
What's that?
I'll time you. Tell me when to
Do I get to reciprocate that later on?
Yes, you do.
All right. See how fast I can actually do this then. All right. So private and load.
$18.
That's not bad. All right. Okay. Now, will it fire? Anybody? Hands up. Think it's go off. 1 person. 2 people. The rest of you, bang. Bam. All right. So the rest of you apparently. Okay. So there's other reasons that these things aren't necessarily the most reliable, right? So one of them has to do with the fact that I've already talked about they don't fire necessarily with a great regularity, right? Another issue is going to be that they're not that accurate, all right? So from here to that tree away, I can hit a man-sized object probably 50-60% of the time, all right? There's a number of reasons for this. One of them being is that I mentioned before, it's a smooth bore musket. Well, what I mean by that is that there's no grooves, so there's no spiral shape that goes all the way down inside the barrel. A modern like firearm is going to have that. And what it does is it causes the bullet to spin, right? So that it moves in a straight line. So think about like throwing a football. Okay, it's going to go straight instead of going, you know, end over end, right? So what happens with the musket ball inside this, especially if it's not perfectly fitting, and keep in mind these are round, they're not torpedo shaped, and when I say round, I mean broadly round, right? They're not perfectly round. So it means what's going to happen is it's just going to kind of ring around the inside until it comes out the end, and it's going to go off one direction or the other, right? So pretty much in a straight line, but the farther away you get, the more it's going to have some kind of fall off. That means it goes farther and farther out of range, right? So this is part of the reason that when you see pictures of soldiers during this period, they're fighting in a big long line of guys, and they're firing what we call volleys, where they're all pulling the trigger at once. So this means instead of having one person sort of firing at a low rate and maybe not hitting the target, you get a giant shotgun blast of concentrated fire that's coming at you all at once. So this is part of the reason that they move in this way, is to deal with the actual technology of how these guns operate. It also is something you're going to see where there are vestiges of it in modern drill, because you'll see guys moving in formations and big lines. And, you know, if you've ever seen the Ceremonial Guard at Parliament Hill, they do that kind of maneuvering, right? Well, that comes directly out of making guys in big lines like that move around so that they can fire off their weapons all at once. Now, the modern military, your weapons are going to be a lot less sort of noisy and visible, all right? So this produces, as I mentioned, a lot of smoke, okay? Now, why is the red coat that I am wearing red?
For Britain?
Anybody? What's that?
For Britain? Or...
No. Anybody got another guess? No? Okay. It's cheap. It's a cheap color. All right, that's the really real reason. The other reason too has a lot to do with visibility. All right, so if I was wearing a modern Canadian Forces uniform, the colors on that are green, dark green, brown, and black, which are like the average of the Canadian landscape. All right, now I am not wearing green. Right? Why is this? Well, the answer is really simple. All right, it's that people in Upper Canada did not evolve the red-green color distinction until about the mid-1850s, okay? Up until that point, right, red and green look really similar to everybody. Anybody buying this? No? Okay, yeah, you're not special, okay? If you put a green thing next to a green thing, they knew that that would cause it to be less hard to see as well, all right? It's not like an invention of the 20th century. We knew what camouflage was back then, right? So what it has to do with is, you saw the amount of smoke that this thing produces when it fires off, right? So if I have like 1,000 people firing at once on a battlefield, that is going to cause a lot of smoke. And especially if it's, say, humid, it's going to hang in the air a lot. So if I'm a middle-aged colonel in an era where glasses haven't been invented yet, I'm going to have a really hard time seeing the enemy on the battlefield, let alone my own troops, if they look like the landscape. So wearing all red means it's going to be really easy to see who it is that I'm looking at, right? And there are items in my uniform too that will also give an indication of what it is that I'm wearing. I think I might actually be wearing, no, I'm wearing the right plume. So for example, you can see that I have a plume in my hat that's red and white. Well, that tells people that I'm a regular line infantry soldier. If it was, say, green, they might think that I'm a light infantry soldier, and if it was just white, they might think I'm a grenadier, so a bigger elite shock troop, like somebody you in size, all right? Big dude who we're all afraid of, okay? All right, I'm gonna try one more time to fire off this thing. Fingers crossed, everyone. I'm sure you'll all be impressed when I get it a third time. Oh, you actually do. Fingers crossed. Thank you. You will not have to time this.
No time?
No. We'll take it nice and easy. Okay, now you're watching me do this, where I'm firing this, standing up as if I did it in a line. And I did mention camouflage before, and there were people who would fight in that way, what we call skirmishing. Okay, so somebody who would be fighting with the British during the War of 1812, that is not a British person. All right, we did it. Okay, look at the smoke. Look at the amount of smoke. Taste it. It's delicious, right? That's what's in my mouth right now. It's like rotten eggs. So for example, we'd have indigenous warriors that would have fought with the British during this time period. And they're going to do things where they're going to be in the bushes, or using the terrain in ways that a British soldier might have been discouraged from doing because they want to rely on that conventional line force. But if you've got a guy who is able to pop up from behind a tree, take a shot at a line of soldiers, and now they have to do this big cumbersome pivot to be able to fire at a guy who's probably already left that area, that's going to cause a lot of disruption for a conventional military force. And this is something that does happen during the war. So I don't want you thinking that this is just a British Army soldier's weapon. It's something that is used throughout the theater by everybody. It's something you would have largely, if you'd grown up here, know how to use. If you lived in the militia, you'd be expected to come into town and demonstrate you know how to use it. And if you're an indigenous person, it's probably a part of a very subsistence culture, let alone the warrior culture that they have in the day. So that's sort of my little spiel on the musket. If you guys want to stick around, you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer them. If you want to come take a photo, by all means, it's well worth getting dressed up and all this stuff. And if you have a chance to pick up the musket and see how heavy it is, no problem. We got to keep it pointed upright, but you can see it probably weighs about 12 pounds, right? Which is actually about the same weight as a modern assault rifle. Anyway, thank you very much. You guys have been a wonderful crowd. Thank you for applauding. It'd be weird if you didn't.